Today, thousands of farm workers live under savage conditions, beneath trees, and amid garbage and human excrement near tomato fields in San Diego County. Tomato fields which use the most modern farm technology. Vicious rats gnaw at them as they sleep. They walk miles to buy food at inflated prices, and they carry in water from irrigation ditches. All my life, I have been driven by one dream, one goal, one vision: to overthrow a farm labor system in this nation that treats farm workers as if they were not important human beings. Farm workers are not agricultural implements. They are not beasts of burden to be used and discarded. That dream was born in my youth. It was nurtured in my early days of organizing. It has flourished. It has been attacked.
Working and living conditions for many farm workers have improved little since Cesar Chavez organized in California in the 1960s and 70s. However, the fields of Ohio and North Carolina have been at the forefront of a new farm worker movement led by labor rights activist Baldemar Velasquez, founder of the Farm Labor Organizing Committee, or FLOC. Using tools of civil disobedience and nonviolent protests, Velasquez has changed the lives of thousands of farm workers. Speaking Truth to Power, the story of the Farm Labor Organizing Committee. The South has proven to be a difficult environment for organizing due to the region's racial divide and anti-unionism. Yet one of the most successful farm worker organizing efforts was the interracial Southern Tenant Farmers Union, or STFU, founded in the 1930s by Arkansas socialists Henry Leland Mitchell and Clay East. The STFU was made up of non-landowning farmers and sharecroppers who were being evicted because of policies enacted by FDR's New Deal. By paying landowners and growers to take farmland out of production, thousands of tenant farmers were evicted and turned into wage laborers. To this day, there remain African American migrant workers who follow the demand for their labor. Despite the support that the STFU received from Eleanor Roosevelt and other prominent liberals, the displacement of tenant farm workers continued, and the organization faded after World War II. Nonetheless, the STFU was influential in organizing in the South. It pioneered the use of civil disobedience and nonviolent protests such as lawsuits, public demonstrations, and long-distance marches, while engaging sympathetic whites in the organization's cause. These techniques were later used by Baldemar Velasquez and the organization he founded. As a child of farm workers, Velasquez grew up poor, but the roots of his activism were sown in the student and civil rights movements of the 1960s. In the Midwest and South, Martin Luther King of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, and the work of the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, provided critical inspiration and advice to the young activist. Velasquez was working for CORE in Cleveland in the 60s when an organizer there suggested a new direction for his activism.
This Mr. Burton, whom I was living with, stops me in the conversation. He says, "Good Lord, son, why aren't you doing something for your own people?" When I was starting to organize the migrant workers in Northwest Ohio, of course I was researching everything I could on agricultural workers and farm workers and the laws and things like that. And you began to read back to the early years of the Wobblies, back at the turn of the century, organizing agricultural workers, and Ernesto Galarza and all the pioneers of early organizing among Latino workers in the West Coast.
It was at an SCLC conference in Atlanta that Velasquez got life-changing advice from Martin Luther King.
And he said one thing that stuck with me ever since. It's been one of the cornerstone pieces of thinking and any strategy that we consider against any powerful opponent. And he said, when you impede the rich man's ability to make money, anything is negotiable. I'll never forget that.
Given the power of unified growers associations in the South, the isolation of farm workers living in labor camps, and the lack of government protections for these workers, the story of FLOC's initial victory against the Campbell Company seems both improbable and a triumph of social and economic justice. In 1978, Velasquez and FLOC first organized a strike of tomato pickers who worked for the farms.
And all of a sudden there was a movement being born. And it became more than just a labor movement. It became a struggle for dignity and civil rights and respect for an entire group of people.
In the struggle to provide farm workers with better working conditions, pay, and benefits, Velasquez decided to take the fight to the corporate buyer of tomatoes, Campbell's. He organized a boycott in 1979, and when that did not bring Campbell's to the table, in 1983 he organized a march in the spirit of his mentors Chavez and King.
So we took the cause to the East Coast, the world headquarters of Campbell Soup in Camden, New Jersey, which is right across the river from Philadelphia. And so we marched from Toledo to Camden, New Jersey, about 600 miles, and it took us 36 days, I believe, to walk 18 miles a day. And we took 100 people, 100 workers, and we marched with our families. And, my own son learned to walk in Cleveland, Ohio. He learned to be a toddler in Cleveland, Ohio.
But it took more than a march to get Campbell's attention to the plight of the farm workers who pick the tomatoes that end up in its juice, soup, and sauce products. It wasn't until FLOC organized a public awareness campaign and boycott of Campbell's financial partner, Philadelphia National Bank, that the conflict was resolved. Putting King's advice into action, FLOC had impeded Campbell's way to make money. In 1986, Campbell's gave in to FLOC's demands and forced their suppliers to sign an agreement with FLOC on behalf of the farm workers.
So we were able to increase the prices for the farmers, to give them the ability to increase better the conditions for the workers and better their pay.
In the late 80s, Velasquez shifted his attention from Ohio to the other major region of the U.S. where pickles are produced, farms in North Carolina, to what several writers have called the sweatshops in the fields. Agriculture depends on a steady flow of mobile labor to work the huge fields of seasonal harvests. Unfortunately, virtually every labor protection passed on both the federal and state level excludes agricultural workers. The work is hazardous. Workers are exposed to pesticides and they work long hours with minimal breaks. Accidents and deaths are commonplace. Wages are low. Benefits non-existent. The workers are housed in labor camps with substandard living conditions. The workers, most of whom come from Mexico, are not easily organized, yet are powerless to change their situation. Nonetheless, Baldemar Velasquez was determined to change things for farm workers in North Carolina. Velasquez took what he had learned from the struggle with Campbell's and brought it to the fields of North Carolina, where thousands of workers pick the cucumbers that become the pickles in our stores. In 1998, he organized a boycott of the Mount Olive products. Just as with Campbell's, the Mount Olive Company refused to negotiate.
I think if you told a North Carolina farmer that he had to have a labor union in order to do business with you, he would tell you that he would grow other crops and would not grow cucumbers for our company or any other pickle processor that was making that demand on him. We believe that we've been wrongly targeted. We were selected because we've got a well-known name in the state of North Carolina and because we resisted FLOC's demands to assist in unionizing the farm workers.
The boycott ended in 2004 when the North Carolina Growers Association reached an agreement allowing as many as 8,000 workers on more than 1,000 farms to form a union without employer interference. Under the agreement, workers received at least one half-day of rest per week, a full day's pay when a worker is injured, a grievance procedure, and other rights. Mount Olive also signed the pact and agreed to pay the growers more for their crops. Velasquez and FLOC had won another victory in the battle for worker rights. Like Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers Union, Baldemar Velasquez and his organization FLOC triumphed in their efforts to increase labor protections for farm workers, but the struggle was about more than wages and working conditions.
When I see a person change from oppressed and oppression and lifts that mantle, that yoke off his shoulders and becomes a free person, I think that that is the triumph, because it's the triumph of the human being and the soul.
I believe you should never forget where you come from, especially if you come from people who know the honor of work. Every time I go to the supermarket, when I select my grapes, my tomatoes, my peaches, I think of the calloused, dark, rough hands that brought them from the field and the orchard to my table. I know these hands well. They are my mother's and my father's hands, humbled and grateful for having work.